Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Insufficient Friends. I'm Kevin. She's Nikki.
Hi.
And Nick, how was your week?
It was good. I don't think there was anything crazy that happened. We had cookie weekend at my aunt's. So Aunt Cindy, who has been
Yes.
on the podcast and
Mm-hmm.
you've met,
Yeah.
we made some cookies for
Okay. I
Christmas.
think we talked about Cookie Weekend before. I think we've
Yeah.
talked about it
So,
before. That sounds. I mean, who doesn't love cookies?
hmm
By the way,
Exactly.
I'm very boring with cookies. My favorite cookie is just a chocolate chip cookie because I don't think you can go wrong with a chocolate chip cookie. Do you have a
Yeah.
what is your favorite cookie?
Yeah. I have like different tiers. I can't, because my favorite depends on my mood.
Okay.
Chocolate chips probably in like my second tier. I don't love them. I'll eat
Okay.
them. They're easy to make
Mhm.
usually. I haven't had many that I'm like, oh, this is not good. But top tier for me would be cherry chip. So basically cherry and chocolate chips, but
Okay.
I just love the cherry.
Okay.
And snickerdoodle. And I think those would probably be in my top tier.
Okay. Snickerdoodle's a
Yeah.
good cookie. Just because I like cinnamon. I've never even
hmm
heard of cherry chip before, so that's
I think it's maybe like a Southern thing because other people say that too, but I have cookbooks where they're in there and we've always made them. I just thought it was normal, but
huh.
they're really good and the cherry's really good in it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that one. But like I said,
Mm.
I'm just a plain boring person and like chocolate chip because that's just me. But
Yeah.
cherry chip. That sounds interesting. I'm not a big cherry person, so I don't know
Oh, yeah.
how that would go. But yeah, that sounds like fun though.
Mhm.
I've still been trying to recover from this illness, which means I'm very tired right now. So
Yeah.
we'll it's gotten a lot better though. I'm not. It's not as bad as it
That's
was
good.
last week, so that's a plus.
Yeah.
But it's been a little tiring of a week. So
Mhm.
we're working through it. So, but anyway, let's. Oh, hit the wrong version of the button. We got one person comment on our YouTube page this week. Um, it was at Mizzou AV. They said, "I don't remember the teacher, but I know it was a good example. I want to say it was Shikani, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't know what they're talking about. So if you want to elaborate, that would be wonderful. Um, because
That
I
like a
don't
professor at Mizzou or something?
know. Shikani was the name of my middle school history teacher.
Oh.
He's one of my favorite teachers I ever had. Actually, I think he is my favorite teacher I ever
Oh.
had because Mr. Shikani was awesome. Um, I think we've talked. I think I've talked about him before. He was the one who used to like play the music in class, and like we that's
Oh.
where we watched
Yeah.
the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show and stuff like that. That was him.
Yeah.
He was an awesome teacher. So I don't know what this person is referring to. I don't remember what we talked about in last week's
Well,
episode to know,
I
but
don't remember talking about that last week. I remember when we talked about like had a middle school teacher that played Gangster's Paradise in
yeah,
the classroom and we were talking about like
yeah.
teachers, but
I know we talked
I don't
about
know.
that, but they commented specifically on last week's episode, so I'm not exactly sure if we
Interesting.
if something happened, which is why at Mizzou AV, I would love you to elaborate. That would be wonderful. And anybody else, if you want to comment below, comment on Instagram, comment on Spotify, whatever. We'll try to
Yeah.
find it.
Thanks for commenting,
Yes,
but
thank
we
you for
maybe are too
commenting.
dumb to
Yeah.
understand you. So,
Yes, I know Shikani. Shikani was awesome, an awesome teacher, but I have no idea what specifically you're talking about. So that would be much helpful if you would elaborate on that. Did you have any shout outs or did we have anything else
no, I
on
don't think
our
so.
Instagram or anything this week that was fun? No?
No, no comments. We had a couple of likes and follows. My friend Weewa from college followed us, and Nick
Okay.
liked some of our reels, but that's
Nice.
about it.
Well, thanks, guys. Um, I think that's probably it for the intros this week. We're going to talk about the Civil War
Mhm.
this week, the American Civil War. Um, and
Yeah, we
I
kind of got a like sub-series going here of
yeah.
like in between other topics we cover. We also like to talk about the different wars in the United States and globally, I think too. But this was next on our list because I think we did the Revolutionary War and then the War
Mhm.
of 1812 and
Mhm.
now the Civil War.
Yeah. And I remember learning about the Civil War in school. I'm sure you do too. Um,
Mhm.
I don't. I remember a little bit. I don't. I remember learning about a little bit about the Revolutionary War and then a little bit about the Civil War. We did a
Mhm.
reenactment when I was in elementary school, like somewhere between third and sixth grade. I don't remember where, or third and fifth grade. But we did a reenactment of a war, and I want to say it was the Civil War, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
I grew up way near um, Springfield, Missouri, which was a big battle. The Battle of Wilson's Creek was a pretty big battle
Mhm.
during the war. But yeah, war started in April of 1861. It only lasted 4 years, which isn't as long as I seem to have thought it did,
Mhm.
which is kind of crazy. Um, that doesn't seem like that doesn't seem like very long to me. Does that
It's,
seem?
I feel like it's for how much we focus on it because when you think of American history, you think of the Revolutionary War and Civil War.
Hmm.
I feel like the impact is much larger than the amount of time that the war actually happened.
Yeah, that's that makes sense. Um, so at their largest, you had the the Union versus the Confederates, which was, North versus South. North was the Union, South was the Confederates. It started out as seceding because people weren't happy with what was going on in the Union and how Lincoln was running the country. And until for the longest time, it wasn't. It was really about just keeping the country united until Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which turned it to a war about ending slavery.
Mhm.
At their highest peak, the Union Army had 600,000 troops, and this Confederates only had half of that, which the Confederates didn't
Mhm.
have for. They did not have a very big army for how long this lasted and how like much fight they put up, which is kind
Yeah.
of
Oh,
crazy.
for sure.
In total, there was, let's see here, uh, around there was 500,000, about 600,000, 6 to 700,000 killed.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah, I
from
think that was
either,
like 2 to 3% of the entire population of the country at
yeah,
that
it
time. Like
wasn't,
something crazy.
yeah, it was a lot of people. Which is also, yeah, because it was,
And I think that a lot of those were disease. Like not
yeah,
those were not all battlefield deaths. Like
no,
the conditions of the camps and everything was so horrible in their medical care. I actually was going to talk about this when I get to like cultural stuff later, but their medical care was so abysmal. Which I mean,
oh
of
yeah.
course, it's not like today's medical care, but just because it was in these battle zones, I
Yeah,
mean, that caused so many deaths.
I mean, and that's yeah, it's dying in a battle zone when you already, like you said, don't have the medical care that we have today because it's the 1800s,
Mhm.
and you're trying to do what medical care you do have in a field,
Yeah.
like literally in a
Yeah.
field. So yeah, it's not it wasn't a good time. um and it happened in just like the middle of cities and towns and things. So it's, I
Mhm.
mean, we think about that's not really any different than how it is now. We just don't ever see that. It's,
Yes. Yeah.
this is the last time a war was fought on U.S. soil. Like, You don't.
Hmm.
We haven't had a war in the United States in 100 and
Yeah.
something years. So
And it's interesting that you mentioned like we don't see it anymore. The Civil War was the first war in the United States. I don't know about in the world in general, but in the United States for sure that was extensively captured in photographs. So, we kind of had this like third wall almost that we're like separated from most wars.
hmm
But for this one, it was in our cities. People saw photographs of soldiers dead on the battlefield.
hmm
Like, I'm sure that that had a very different impact than, the Revolutionary War was obviously also in the cities, but you didn't have the pictures and the impact on the civilians as much, at least in my mind, by being able to see the pictures in newspapers and things
yeah,
like that.
yeah. Um, so you had two major armies. You had Lincoln and I mean a rash of generals. A bunch of different generals that kind of went around, but the big one that kind of was at his side for most of this was Ulysses S. Grant, who eventually also became president of the United States. Uh, on the Confederate side, you had Jefferson Davis, who was the president, and Robert E. Lee, who was formerly a U.S. In
Mhm.
general, but decided to
Mhm.
um, uh,
Yeah,
take up
didn't
the.
Lee and Grant go to the same? They both went to that army. Um, what is it called? They both went to the same training for the army.
Oh, that's very possible.
West Point? Is it West Point?
West Point is the
I
military
think,
school.
yeah,
Yes,
I think they were in like the same, I don't know the right term for it,
United States.
class.
The United States Military Academy is where Grant went. So,
Oh, okay.
um, let's see here. Where did Lee
Yeah.
go? I can't.
Because they knew of each other before this all happened. Like they weren't, right?
I
I
mean,
don't
I
think they
would
were
I
strangers.
would guess so because I don't think any. I mean, all these guys had worked together until this all stopped, is what it seemed like.
Yeah.
From what I read, and of course my reading is not extensive, but from what I gathered from this, yeah, I mean, it was more of some people decided to stay more with the states than with the federal government and
Hmm.
vice versa, and that's kind of what happened. So Lee decided to stay with his
Yeah.
state and stay more loyal to his state instead of to the federal government, and that's what ended up
Yeah.
happening. Why he went to the Confederacy instead of the Union. Um,
Yeah.
there was a lot. I mean, there's a ton of battles. So many different battles, so many different sieges.
Hmm.
Grant fought his way down the Mississippi River while Lee was fighting to try to overtake Washington. Um, Eventually, Grant was put in charge of the entire U.S. The Union forces, um,
Hmm.
and they ended up meeting at Gettysburg, which is the largest battle basically ever fought in the U.S. Um, and that was won by the Union after back and forth. Lincoln didn't have support. This was an election time. They were hoping that Confederates were hoping that he would they would win and he would look bad and they'd get a sympathizer in there to run for president and stuff like that. And it was just a once Gettysburg happened and um, they kind of started pushing people back. The Union Army started pushing people back. It was kind of over, even though a lot of states didn't um, surrender until afterwards.
Hmm.
Um, but of course, Lincoln was shot and killed in Ford's Theater in D.C., um, which was another, you know, kind of that was after the war was kind of already over. He had aged a lot. If you look at the pictures of him from when he
Hmm.
started the presidency to when
Yeah.
he ended the presidency, he looks like everybody looks older. If you look at a picture of Obama,
Yeah.
he looks older. If you look at a picture of Bush, if you look at a picture of any of them, they all look older.
Hmm.
Lincoln looks like he aged like 50 years in that 4 year span. It's
Yes. Yeah, it's crazy.
it's
We went to
crazy.
have you ever been to the Abe Lincoln Museum in Springfield,
I
Illinois?
haven't. I've I've
Okay.
been to I've been to Clinton's library in Little Rock, and I've been
Okay.
to Truman's library, which is in Independence, so that's in Missouri. That's
Okay.
not that far
Yeah,
from you,
I've been to that one
but
too. Yeah, but they had like the succession of his lifetime in pictures, of course, because it's his
yeah,
museum. But yeah, it is crazy.
yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, it was not obviously pretty. Uh, hundreds and thousands of people died, more than a million probably people died in these battles. You had a lot of people leave and desert because they didn't want to. Um, they got tired of fighting. Disease, everything else. This is, um,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of stuff going on. There was also, I know you kind of looked more into the politics, but I know that Europe
Mhm.
almost got involved in this.
Mhm.
I was reading something about that or saw something about that Europe, there was a concern for Lincoln that Europe would get involved and side with the South because they didn't have a lot of goods coming in that they normally had
Mhm.
until Lincoln decided
Yeah.
to sign the Emancipation Proclamation and turn it into a war
Yeah.
about slavery, which kind of is like, yeah, we're
Mhm.
not gonna touch that now. That's kind of a
Yeah, so there's so many, and this is why I wanted to research the politics and cultural, phenomenons at the time, because there's so many myths and theories that are just wrong about the Civil War. And so I was like, okay, I need to find a credible source to say, okay, this was the reasons leading up to it and everything. So the American Civil War Museum, I'm like, okay, surely that is a good source.
we would hope so.
So they say that there were several factors, of course, leading up to this. So the defense of states' rights, so exactly what you said before,
Hmm.
Southern honor or Southern pride, fear of federal coercion. So kind of in my mind, that's kind of the same as states' rights.
Hmm.
Um, and a growing belief that just the South and North should be just two completely different civilizations. But the American Civil War Museum says that it's not these, their exact words are abstract motives that prompted the secession and led to the war. They said the South's defense of the institution of slavery is the indispensable factor that led to the war. So that's interesting. But I can see how that would affect a lot of economies, not that
Oh
that's
yeah,
great or
I
anything, but
mean
yes, absolutely that will affect
it.
economies that are set up the way they are at the time.
Yeah,
But
because it
I thought that
was
was interesting.
everything in this. I mean, a lot of the South, if you go there now, you can go see them. It was a lot of plantations and very
Hmm.
labor heavy farming that,
Hmm.
I mean, an economy like that would run on people. Like you need people,
Yeah.
and that doesn't make it right. It
Yeah.
is
So that was very
morally
much like
wrong,
the
but
tipping point of um, what prompted the actual war. So there were a lot of other underlying motives, but I think people definitely nowadays say, oh, it wasn't about slavery. And it's like, no, yeah, it was.
yeah.
That was the tipping point that led to the
I
war.
mean,
But
there was even a
yeah,
senator that said something about like states' rights is. I mean, one of the states' rights was of the ability to keep slaves. Like that's
yeah,
so. Yeah,
yeah. So,
it's controversial, but it's. I mean, that was the main thing, and that's what the war ended up
yeah,
eventually being turned into anyway. Was emancipation.
yes.
So
Hmm. So that was interesting because I always try to find like the truth amongst the myths, but I also looked up different cultural things because whenever we talk about anything in history, I always like to do like a deeper dive into like what was life like at the time.
hmm.
And so we already talked about, cameras were becoming a big thing. So this was the first war to be photographed, medical care. So not only were they being treated in the field, like they didn't know what sepsis was. They didn't know how to treat infectious diseases that were spreading amongst the camps,
Yeah.
and not only in the camps but in the cities. And
Hmm.
there was just so many other facets of that. But like their ambulances were horse-drawn wagons, which
Yeah.
is wild. Like I've been in an ambulance, I've had emergency surgery. I
Yeah.
can't imagine being in a horse-drawn
Nope.
wagon.
Nope.
Oh my goodness, that would be
Yeah.
wild. So
Um, one of the things I thought was funny that I saw was that there was reports of when this started of people leaving town and going to where these battles were happening and basically just setting up picnics and watching
yep.
watching it like a spectator sport, because
Yeah.
humans killing each other is totally just the most.
I mean, think of like gladiators.
It's the
We've
same
talked about
thing.
this before. Like it's
It
wild that
is.
people just watch each other kill each other, and
Yeah,
that used to be our sports.
that's
Yeah.
just it amazes
It's
me. But
crazy. But some other interesting things. So obviously, culturally, they did not have the communication devices we have now. So they used not only like on the battlefields, but also spies and outside the
yeah.
battlefield. They used animals, music. So they would like send codes through like the drummers or
Hmm.
different musicians. They literally used carrier pigeons sometimes, like that is real. That's not just like a Harry Potter scene. Like they really did that.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
Um, Dogs, and then they used aircraft, hot air balloons.
Yeah.
So, and then obviously like coded messages and things
Yeah.
like that too, and just normal notes. But and then the last kind of like interesting thing was just like the fashion at the time. I always like to look at the fashion. Um, so this was really funny to me. Obviously, we've all seen like pictures of what they were wearing during the
Yeah.
Civil War. We've seen the get-ups and everything, but this specifically was beards. So like the soldiers were allowed to like have beards. And it's just funny because they're supposed to be like very clean shaven.
Hmm.
And this article kind of made it hint at like the women would do the shaving and everything, and like shave their husbands' faces, and then they would go off to war and have a beard. And I don't, it's just little things like that that I'm
Hmm.
like, I don't know why we need to know that, but it's
I
interesting.
mean, it puts you in the time, I guess. Like it's
Yeah.
that
Hmm.
kind of stuff is interesting. Lincoln had a beard. Maybe they were just trying to be like him. There's some of them. Maybe some of them were
Yeah.
trying to be like him. Some of them weren't. I don't know. I
Yeah.
it's it is um like I said, I grew up next to a battlefield, so I went there on a somewhat regular basis as a kid for school trips and things like that. And
Hmm.
you learn, but when you're that young, you don't really have a concept of what
Yeah.
you're doing or what you're looking at or anything else. It's
Hmm.
not a big thing. It's not there's not a grave site at that funeral or at that uh battlefield. There's not
Yeah.
there's not like a big grave site there. Like I think there is a Gettysburg was turned into a grave site because of this,
Hmm.
and that's what Lincoln was actually speaking at when he gave the Gettysburg Address, was the opening of that. But um,
Hmm.
can you imagine, like that speech is one of the most famous speeches ever read,
Yeah.
and it's 2 minutes
Hmm.
long.
Yeah.
That's it. It's
It's
2 minutes.
wild. I mean,
Why can't we
so
do that
speeches and
now?
propaganda in general like fueled this war,
Oh
as
yeah,
with any war,
with
but
anything, yeah.
yeah. Hmm.
But like, why can't we? Like, I don't feel like any politician now can get up and talk without talking for at least 45 minutes to an hour. Why can't we just do the two
Yeah.
minutes again? Like, why?
And old speeches like that, or older, I should say, um, they're much more like inspirational and thought-provoking versus nowadays everyone tries to say like little one-liners that will
Yeah,
go viral.
yeah,
So, you could be talking for 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever the time limit is, but really you're just trying to get like bits and pieces here and there that someone from the news
We'll grab.
or
Yeah.
social media will grab onto and go viral.
Yeah.
And no one listens to the rest of the
No.
speech. So
Which I get.
it's just very
Like,
different time in
it's
general.
yeah, it's just the time. It's like what it was versus what it is now. It's just times changing. But um,
Yeah.
I agree. It is now. It's trying to get the 10-second sound bite. It's trying to get your point across in
Yes.
10 seconds that's going to capture people's imaginations and push them to your cause is what it is.
100%.
But,
Yeah.
back then, you know, which also nowadays, people watch a 30-second video and that's about their attention span for
Mhm.
anything, which is too,
I'm guilty of that. I cannot watch very many movies because I'm like, this is so
we
long and
we
boring.
we know you can't watch many
Yeah,
movies. Like, we've
I
discussed
know.
that many times on this podcast.
Yeah. I have to like really, really, really be interested in it and
Yeah.
like want to watch it.
I mean, I get that. Like, I understand. Um
Hmm.
but yeah, the Civil War is interesting. It's probably one of the, I would say that and World War II are probably the ones that I learned most about in school.
Hmm.
I learned some
Yeah.
about the Revolutionary War, a good amount about the Civil War, a good amount about World War II. I don't even remember talking about World War One. So,
I don't either. That was always
um,
the most confusing one to me on the AP test because I was like, did we even talk about
yeah,
this?
I don't ever remember.
But
We'll get to it eventually
yeah.
in our little series
Yeah.
of wars here.
I'll learn more when we
Yeah,
talk
we'll
about
we'll learn more
it.
whenever we talk about it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just it's there's so much that happened in such a short period in that 4 years. Like, it seems like it
Yeah.
didn't happen that seems like it didn't last that long, but
Mhm.
there was a ton of stuff that happened. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's kind of what, you know, makes me think, because, like,
Yeah.
we just ended the war in Afghanistan, which the United States was
Mhm.
involved in for 20 years, and it doesn't seem
Mhm.
like there was as much that happened in that 20 years as this 4 years. So, that's what I read about this
Yeah, like
4 years.
if you asked me to tell you about the Civil War, I think I could give a pretty good description of
Yeah,
the Civil War and some of the major battles and the highlights.
yeah,
But if you asked me to describe the war in Afghanistan, I mean, there's so many layers.
yeah,
I can't even begin to talk about like modern wars because uh, they're much more complicated now almost.
yeah.
Like there's so many different layers to everything
There's
nowadays.
there's different things
Versus
going
back then it was
on.
like there's one issue, one cause that you're fighting for, and
Yeah,
now it's like, well, this country believes this one believes this, but they also have had their own history, and when do we
yeah.
get involved in it's like so beyond me. Like I could never be a political
And
consultant or
I
anything.
think proxy wars are more common now too. You get other people involved in
Hmm.
things that really don't have anything to do with them,
Exactly.
which, the U.S. has been
Yeah.
involved with, just like a bunch of other major, world leaders.
Hmm.
So, it's just one of those things. So I think times have changed a lot, and so don't come at us
Yeah.
that we're not. So I'm sorry, we're not
Yeah.
experts here, folks. We're
But
just
did
doing a
you have anything
podcast.
else on the Civil War and battles and things before I talk about the ghosties?
I don't think so. Let's go to the ghosties because that's fun. I like
Okay.
ghosties.
I love the ghosties. So I had this book growing up. You remember the Scholastic book fairs? I
Oh yeah,
loved them.
yeah, they were great.
Okay. Yes. So Cheryl Harness, she's an author and she has a ton of different books. There's a whole line of them. Um, there's one like Ghost of Revolutionary War, Ghost of the White House, and it's all every single book is like basically, I mean, they're not all the same, but the general premise is usually like it's a kid like going back in time or seeing a ghost that explains history to them.
Okay.
So she has one that's called Ghost of the Civil War,
Okay.
and
Nice.
the main character meets the ghost of Abe Lincoln, and Abe Lincoln explains the Civil War to her.
That's
So
cool.
that's where like my fascination with history and ghosts and things probably started. Was these are like my favorite books that
They're
I
like
still have from the
intertwined,
Scholastic Book Fair.
intertwined together.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fun.
Yeah. So there's tons of ghost stories from the Civil War, but I'm just going to tell you one.
Okay.
Because this is one of the most famous. So if anyone is like in the paranormal community, you've most likely heard of this place or been to this place. the Jenny Wade house in Gettysburg.
Hmm.
So Jenny Wade was the only civilian casualty of the war. That's like she was shot and killed by a soldier in her home. Um, I'm sure there were others
I'm
like
sure there
that
were other,
died of
because
sickness, and but she was like directly shot by a soldier.
okay,
So Jenny Wade was 20. So this was in 1863 in Gettysburg. Um, so Jenny Wade, her mother and two younger brothers, they lived in central Gettysburg, but they had traveled to the house of her sister, who was still also in Gettysburg, because her sister needed some help with her newborn child. And in the first day of fighting, Jenny was making bread. She was kneading dough for bread in the kitchen when a musket ball, there's a specific name for it, but I don't know ammunition, so I'm just gonna say a musket ball.
okay,
I don't know.
yeah, that
A
works.
bullet, whatever it's called.
Mm-hmm.
It went through the kitchen door and the parlor door, and hit Jenny Wade. And so it went through her left shoulder and her heart. And then it got stuck in her corset, but she was killed immediately because it went through her heart. Um, and no
Hmm.
one's sure which side like fired the shot because
Yeah,
they all used the same guns
yeah,
and ammunition. So some authors have said it was the Confederacy, but I think that's just because they want to make him out to be the bad guy. I don't really
yeah.
know. No
There's
one really
yeah,
knows.
there's really no telling.
But Jenny Wade's mom heard her fall to the floor and found her and went to get her sister Georgia. And there were Union soldiers like in the house, and they came downstairs because they were like stationed there
Mm-hmm.
because there's so many houses in Gettysburg
Yeah.
that were housing soldiers at the time. And so they helped the family like bury her in the backyard, I guess. But
Hmm.
yeah, so the Jenny Wade house is still like they've kept it as a museum as it originally was,
All right.
as it was, the day she died. Um, and it's reportedly one of the most haunted locations in Gettysburg, besides the actual battlefield.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
that's one that you can go and visit, and it's a museum, and she reportedly is still there making her bread.
Hmm. That's cool. Um, I will mention one of the other things that we didn't mention is obviously the slaves, that were
Mhm.
part of this war. You
Yeah,
had the Underground
that fought.
Railroad of trying to move people up, and yeah, it
Mhm.
was actually a while into the war before the Union Army started allowing black people
Mhm.
to even fight.
To
Um,
serve, yeah.
Get to serve, which is, you would have thought you would have thought they would have started from the beginning with that, uh,
Yeah. I mean,
but
even though the Union, the North was the anti-slavery side,
hmm
they still were not reformed
no,
culturally. Like they still were
no,
not, yeah. So they're definitely not like all happy sunshine rainbow good guys. Like they
no.
were still people of that time period. But
There's
yeah.
still problems for sure. Um,
Hmm.
I think that's it. Is that time for facts?
Hmm.
Are we to facts now? I think.
I was gonna ask you one question
Yeah, go for it.
unrelated to the Civil War.
Okay.
Just about ghosts. If you were a ghost, because like obviously every time I tell you a ghost story, it's usually someone who like died and then they're still haunting the spot that they died.
Yeah.
But if you could theoretically be anywhere in your afterlife, where would you want to spend like eternity haunting?
Do you really have to ask this question?
Why?
Isn't it pretty obvious? Where do I always say that I want to go? I
Disney?
want to go to Disney.
Main Street?
I want to haunt Disney. I don't know. No, I want to be the
Mhm.
thousandth haunt in the haunted mansion. It's
Oh, that's a good one.
999 happy haunts. I want to be the thousandth haunt.
Yeah,
I want to be the thousandth haunt in
that's
the haunted
funny.
mansion.
I like that.
Because that just seems like fun. Like,
That's good.
because it also it's themed with haunted people. So they're
Yeah,
that yeah. So what
I
would
like that. That's a
what
good
would your
answer.
pick be for that? Like if you had to haunt a
I don't know. I think
place.
I would stay around and annoy my family until they all passed away. But then I would probably go, like, theoretically, if you can, like, move and go
Yeah,
places when you're a
if you can
ghost.
choose. Yeah.
Um, Obviously, I would say probably Scotland. But if
That makes
we're
sense.
staying in the US, I think it'd be fun to spend eternity on the East Coast where all these like there's all the battlefields, the museums. So maybe like Boston or Philadelphia.
Just hanging out with the other ghosts.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I'd want to go and hang out with like the founding father ghost or
yeah,
something and
that'd be
like
fun.
replay some of those
If you could, I
moments. It'd
mean,
be interesting. I
if you could
They
travel,
probably didn't have women voicing their opinions, but I think it'd be
yeah.
fun to be
But if you could
there.
travel as a ghost, that'd be fun. Like I would enjoy,
Yeah.
I would enjoy traveling as a ghost. That would be fun. I don't think that's really how it works, but it's
Yeah.
that
Probably not.
that seems like it'd be
But
fun.
theoretically, if you could like hop in your little ghosty car and go wherever, then
Yeah,
I'd
I
probably go to
mean,
the East Coast and sit with the founding fathers or
yeah,
something.
yeah. Won't it? Yeah, wouldn't it suck if you had to still do like make money in your ghostly time? Like I'm dead. Why do I still have
Yeah.
to? Why do I still have to make money and pay rent? Like that would just be.
Yeah. Well, you shouldn't have to eat or pay rent, so.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't ever sleep, which is kind of unfortunate because I like sleeping. Um,
Sleeping is my favorite part of the day. Like, honestly, I look forward to sleeping so much.
yeah, I do sometimes. It depends on how tired I am. Right now, I'm looking forward to sleeping.
Yeah,
But I think it's time for facts. Um, so Nick, what is your fact for this week?
okay, so mine's about Abe Lincoln.
Okay.
So Abe Lincoln was actually shot about 3 years before his assassination as well. So it was August 1863, and he was riding alone from the White House back to his summer residence. And they don't know who, but a shot rung out and his horse galloped into the compound and he was like barely clinging on and his hat was gone. And one of the privates that was, at his summer residence, because they still had, people there guarding the
Mm-hmm.
residence,
Yeah.
found his hat and it had a bullet hole through it.
Interesting.
So, but they tried to keep it under wraps because he didn't want to worry his wife, Mary, apparently. This is how the story goes.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, so he was shot at and almost assassinated before his assassination.
Interesting. You can actually see, um, they have his hat in the Smithsonian that has the bullet hole from when he was assassinated.
That's
Um,
wild.
I'm pretty sure that's the one that it is. Yeah. So they've got a lot of a lot of cool stuff in the Smithsonian. That's kind
I
of
like the
it's
Smithsonian.
a
Have you ever
really
been there?
cool. I went to the Air and Space one
Okay, we do
for
too.
not very long. I would love to go back to DC because we were only there for like 3 days or something. So we didn't get to
Hmm.
spend very much time anywhere, and I would love to go back and go through some more of the Smithsonian museums. Um,
It's really, really cool. Too bad we don't have more like commenters and listeners. Maybe they could pay for our trip.
yeah, that's gonna be what we're gonna start doing is when we start going on vacations together because we're trying to do podcast stuff. We should go to DC. That would be fun.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Okay, so my fun fact is it has to do with more like deaths, because
Okay.
me. More than 3 million people fought in the war in total. 2% of the population died,
Hmm.
which is a lot. Like
It is a lot.
it's not like it doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot of people. Like
It is. It truly is.
2% of the population died. And in the 2 days of battles along the Tennessee River at Shiloh, more Americans died in the 2 days than all the previous American wars combined.
It's so wild. Now, I'm like, what do they count in that stat? Like, there were British deaths in the Revolutionary War, but it's still wild nonetheless.
Yeah. I mean, they're talking just Americans and the other ones. So, um,
Hmm.
that is stats like that are insane. Um,
Hmm.
just the number of it's amazing how many people die in a war. Um,
Hmm.
and it's just it's just amazing. War in general is amazing, and how the
Hmm.
fact that that's what we use to solve differences sometimes. But
Yeah.
it is.
There's
It
a
is what it is, I
pretty
guess.
famous quote from Fallout, but it's war never changes, I think. War never changes.
That sounds about
Yeah.
right. Um,
Yep.
it gets more advanced, but it doesn't ever really change.
Yeah.
it's always bad.
The
So
the premise
yeah.
stays the same.
On that sad note, I think we're gonna end this week.
Happy
Yeah.
Sunday.
Happy Sunday, guys. We hope you guys enjoyed this. It's really not enjoyable. It's kind of sad, but you know, we hope you learned something. Maybe I doubt it because we don't do very good at this. It's more for us than it is for you, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. 100%.
But, you know. But anyway, hope you guys had fun. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.